From the first verse to the last, the Bible presents the journey of a God who calls everything into existence, watches humanity drift away, and still lays out a path back home. Before any form, there was only silence and darkness. Then the divine word breaks the emptiness and brings order to life. Light floods the chaos. Time begins to move. The sky rises. The seas pull back, and fertile ground appears. From there, seeds sprout, stars shine above, and life spreads through water and land. At the height of creation, God shapes man from dust and shares with him the breath of his own life. In that moment, our story gains direction, with decisions that would shape generations, kingdoms, covenants, and promises that echo through the centuries. If you want to keep walking through this timeline with me and see how it transforms the present, go ahead and subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters. In God's garden, Adam lived surrounded by life, but no creature reflected who he was. After watching every living being and naming them all, he falls asleep by the Creator's work, who takes part of his own body and forms someone equal to him. When he wakes and finds the woman, he recognizes himself in her, and the two begin to walk side by side while God visits them at the end of the day. There was order and peace, with only one clear boundary: the fruit of one tree could not be touched. Then the serpent approaches Eve, questions the divine word, sparks curiosity and desire. She reaches out, tastes the fruit, and gives it to Adam. The moment they eat it, the lightness disappears. God's voice no longer sounds pleasant, and they hide among the trees. The garden is closed, guarded by fire, and from that point on begins a long story of fall and of searching for something humanity knows. Deep down, it has lost. After Eden was left behind, the human family began to spread out. Among the descendants of Adam and Eve were two brothers with very different paths: Abel, who cared for the flock, and Cain, who worked the soil. The moment came for each of them to present an offering to God. Abel set aside the best of his animals. Cain brought the results of his harvests. God accepted Abel's offering and didn't show the same favor to Cain, because he saw beyond the gesture and reached what was in the heart. Hurt, Cain let resentment turn into jealousy and then into hatred. Even after being warned, he led his brother out to the field and took his life there, marking the first mourning and a broken bond between brothers. Time passed, families multiplied, and wickedness spread. The earth, which once showed signs of care, began to carry marks of violence and corruption. In this setting, Noah appeared, a man who chose to walk with God. When he received the order to build an ark, even with no sign of a storm, he chose to obey. For years that man cut wood and built a huge vessel while his neighbors laughed and called his work madness. They saw no danger, but with every strike of the hammer he followed one purpose: to protect life. When the ark was finally ready, something unexpected happened. Animals began to appear from every direction: felines, birds, reptiles, herds, wild beasts. They arrived in pairs, male and female, filling every space as if obeying a silent command. Then everything changed. The sky darkened, the ground split open, and waters rose and fell without stopping for many days. Mountains vanished under the waves, cities disappeared, conversations were swallowed by the roar of the rain. Only the ark kept moving over the waters, carrying people, promise, and the possibility of a new beginning. After a long wait, the hull finally came to rest, and a dove returned with a branch in its beak, sign that the land was breathing again. Time passed, the population grew, and with it, pride. Speaking the same language and united by the same project, they decided to build a tower that reached the heights of heaven. It wasn't shelter, it was display. Each brick seemed to declare, "We'll get there on our own. We don't need guidance." And the structure rose, not just in height, but in presumption. While people celebrated their own greatness and raised a tower to touch the sky, God saw that their unity didn't come from surrender but from pride trying to take his place. Suddenly, what had been one people turned into noise. Instructions were lost, words no longer made sense, and hands that once worked together started acting like strangers. The worksite filled with arguments and abandoned tools. The tower, once a symbol of confidence, stood still as an unfinished monument, reminding everyone that human strength without God collapses. Scattered across the earth, people built different altars and created their own versions of the divine, fragments of a truth no one could see whole. In this world of divided voices, God spoke to one man, and he answered, Abraham. He didn't receive a building plan, but a call to leave, a promise to make him a great nation. With no map and no visible guarantees, he left his family and land, crossing deserts guided only by a voice. Years passed, his body aged, Sarah's womb remained empty, but his trust did not break. When everything suggested it was too late, laughter filled the tent. Isaac was born, proof that God upholds what he promises. Abraham's journey became the beginning of a new story between God and humanity. Many generations later, another man would also be tested. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, torn from his home, and taken as a slave to Egypt. Even in that condition, he chose to stay attentive to what God showed him, interpreting dreams no one else could understand. Because of this, he earned trust inside the palace and was eventually placed by Pharaoh as the administrator over the entire empire, second only to the throne. In the time of famine, it was the very brothers who had sold him who bowed before him, hungry, with no idea who was standing in front of them. As the years passed, Joseph's descendants became a large people. Egypt, which had once been a refuge, turned into a place of chains, hard labor, and cruel commands. Their cry rose to God, and then Moses was called, the man who had left the palace and returned as a messenger. Before Pharaoh, he declared God's command, "Let my people go." When the king resisted, signs and successive plagues shook the empire until freedom was granted. Right after leaving, however, the people found themselves trapped between the sea and the war chariots closing in. Moses raised his staff, and God opened a path through the waters, with the sea pulling back on both sides. The people crossed through that unlikely corridor into a new chapter, walking no longer as slaves but as a nation. God was leading toward what was still to come. By the way, if seeing these stories as one connected timeline helps you, I've put together simple PDF study guides that walk through the whole Bible with summaries, timelines, and key characters. You can use them in your personal study or with your family. The link is in the pinned comment. Take a look later if it sounds helpful to you. The God who hears the cry of the suffering is the same one who opens a path where people see only walls. With the sea behind them, the people entered the desert carrying on their bodies the marks of slavery, but holding deep inside the memory of a promise. They were free, but they still needed to learn how to live as a people set apart, guided by the Lord. So they camped before the mountain. The deliverer who had acted with power would now speak through his word. While the summit smoked and thunder broke the silence, the people waited in reverence, and God called Moses to ascend. 40 days and 40 nights he remained before God's glory until he received the tablets of the covenant written by the Lord's own hand, bringing not only commands but a revelation of his character and of the path for a life in covenant. From that moment on, that code would begin shaping the identity of the nation, guiding their relationship with God and their dealings with one another, marking their steps with the sign that they belong to him among all other nations. After Moses' departure, the people needed someone to continue the journey. Joshua, known for his loyalty and steadiness, was called by God to lead that generation into what had been promised to their ancestors since the days of Abraham. It wasn't just about crossing borders. It was about embracing an identity. They were the people of the promise. But before they could see the land in their hands, a barrier rose up. Jericho. A closed city, protected by walls that looked impossible to overcome. And it was exactly there that God showed He doesn't act by human logic. Instead of battle, silence. Instead of direct confrontation, trumpets and steps of obedience. For 6 days, the people simply marched around the city. On the 7th, at the sound of the trumpets and the shout, the walls collapsed. It wasn't force, it was trust. From that moment on, Israel began to take hold of its inheritance, but God was still shaping the heart of that people. Conquering territory was only the beginning. Learning to depend on the Lord in every decision was the deeper work that had just begun. In that time, when the nation lived on high alert and every move from its leaders seemed decisive, no one imagined that an almost unknown young man would be called to the center of God's story. While the soldiers measured the enemy and backed away in fear, a giant warrior taunted Israel day after day, challenging, "Who dares come against me?" The battle lines stayed frozen until a young shepherd arrived at the field carrying only a sling, a few stones, and the certainty that the God who had protected him from wild beasts in the desert would be with him there as well. When the stone was released, the giant fell, and everyone saw that victory didn't depend on the weight of the armor, but on trust in God. From that moment on, the young man who played the harp and tended sheep began walking the path toward the throne, where his battles, songs, and decisions would become part of a story God was still writing with His people. The story of that king doesn't end on the battlefield. His deepest mark was invisible because from his house Solomon was born. If the father brought down giants by trusting in the Lord, the son received a different weight, leading an entire nation. Still inexperienced, aware that the throne required more than courage or skill, he turned to prayer. He could have asked for gold, fame, or safety, but chose something rare, understanding to guide Israel. God answered that request. Solomon became known for firm decisions and for a wisdom that drew rulers from other nations. Israel entered a time of peace and order. But over time, the people's hearts drifted, even after witnessing God's presence in the temple. So the Lord raised up prophets, ordinary people carrying a direct message from heaven, yet almost no one listened. Then came the siege, the fall of Jerusalem, and the exile in Babylon. Even so, God did not take His eyes off His covenant. Far from home, many learned that the Lord's presence wasn't confined to walls or borders. Far from Jerusalem, many discovered that faith was the only thing they could still carry. Daniel was among them. He lived in Babylon and served in another court, but the center of his heart remained turned toward the God of Israel. It was that loyalty that led him to the lion's den, surrounded by hungry jaws and unjust decrees. But that night, nothing touched him. Something unseen silenced the roar of the beasts and preserved his life. Daniel's friends were also tested. Before the statue raised by the king, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego chose to stay standing when everyone else bowed. Because of that, they were thrown into a blazing furnace. What should have been their end revealed another reality. Among the flames, there was a fourth figure, whose presence brought peace in the middle of the heat. The exile did not stop God's work. In streets filled with longing and in labor fields, prophets continued announcing that God still spoke, still saw, still remembered. They pointed to a Messiah who would carry the people's guilt and heal their wounds. Years later, on an ordinary night in Bethlehem, the promise took on the face of a child and began writing a new chapter in human history. With every step that boy took, the reach of that hope was revealed little by little. He didn't arrive in palaces, but in a forgotten corner of the world, laid where few would ever notice. While most people slept, something unequaled happened. The Creator stepped into the very story He had written. The God no one could see now had hands, a voice, a face. in the middle of an ordinary setting, something completely new began, like a small flame breaking the darkness and announcing a different time. Years later, this man walked dusty roads, narrow alleys, and crowded squares. He met people exhausted, sick, lost inside themselves, and his eyes never looked past them. With simple commands, the sea grew calm, sickness retreated, death lost its grip. But nothing spoke louder than the way he treated people, drawing near to those everyone avoided, restoring those who had failed, embracing the one who denied him, praying for the ones who attacked him. In this way, he revealed that God's reign begins on the inside. When pride surrenders, grace is received, forgiveness is released, and justice starts guiding everyday choices. In every gesture, he opened a path back for anyone who thought they were too far gone. The kingdom he presented didn't fit into any human system of power. Instead of dominating, he welcomed. Instead of favoring the strong, he drew near to the despised. This unsettled those who claimed to defend the law, exposed the hypocrisy of leaders confident in their own status, and dismantled the logic of control that held the system together. When that conflict reached its peak, the moment he had come for arrived. The betrayal didn't come from a distant enemy, but from someone who had shared the table and the bread. Judas handed him over to hostile hands. What followed was a heavy night, a rushed trial, witnesses twisting facts, a council choosing convenience, and a governor more concerned with his image than with justice. The same crowd that once welcomed him with celebration now raised their voices for his death. On the hill of execution, he was lifted up between criminals, crowned with thorns, and made the target of mockery. Even wounded, he prayed for those who hurt him and remained steady in his purpose of giving his own life. When his breath finally ceased, the earth shook, the temple veil tore, and before everyone's eyes, the Son of God proved to the end the love he had proclaimed. Early that morning, before the sun rose, the tomb no longer held the Master's body. The stone had been rolled away, the place was empty, and one truth stood firm. Jesus was alive. Death, which seemed to have ended everything, had been defeated. The cross, once seen as a loss, was actually the beginning of something new. There began the restoration of the covenant between God and humanity, sealed by the blood of Christ and sustained by the grace that opens the way to salvation. Years later, elderly and exiled on Patmos, John received a vision. He saw seals opening, trumpets echoing over the nations, and forces rising against God. He heard the cry of those who had given their lives out of faithfulness to Christ, and witnessed the preparation for the final clash between good and evil. Amid powerful scenes, a voice sounded with a firm promise, "Behold, I make all things new." The future God announced is not one of fear, but of restoration. Tears will be wiped away, death will lose its power, pain will have no place, and there will be no separation between the Creator and the redeemed. God's people will live forever before the throne, in the presence of the one who reigns. From creation to the foretold end, the Bible reveals a single purpose: God forming a people, rescuing those who turned away, and leading everything toward renewal in Christ. It is the Father who calls, the Son who gives himself, and the Holy Spirit who remains with us. Everything points to one sure conclusion: Jesus will return, and with him will come the fullness of eternity. This series was created to help you see past, present, and future in the light of the Word. If you want to walk with us in this journey, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and invite others to receive this message of hope.